Summer in Maple Ridge always smelled like charcoal and nostalgia. The first warm evenings were marked not by the sound of crickets, but by the hiss of grills and the laughter of families spilling into backyards. Every house, every porch, carried the heartbeat of barbecue season. Kids waving sparklers, neighbors sharing ribs over fences, country music humming faintly through the air. It was paradise, at least until the HOA decided they hated smoke. Our homeowners association had always been picky. They measured grass blades, banned holiday yard inflatables, and once fined a resident because their mailbox was too expressive. But this year they outdid themselves. The new restriction came under the guise of fire prevention guidelines. A 2-page policy bulletin stuffed into every mailbox, printed in all caps that made it sound more urgent than a state emergency. The short version, outdoor grilling, in all forms, was temporarily suspended pending safety review. No more charcoal, no propane, no smokers. The timing wasn't suspicious. It was strategic. The policy dropped right before the annual 4th of July cookouts, the biggest social event our neighborhood had left. People were furious. You'd think something as small as banning BBQs wouldn't ripple through an entire community, but in Maple Ridge, grilling wasn't a hobby. It was identity. It was the sound of summer. The HOA hadn't just banned food. They'd banned connection. When I read the letter, I laughed at first. Sounded absurd, like a prank or satire. But by the weekend, fines began appearing. The Williams family got one for running a suspiciously large outdoor appliance. Another neighbor was cited for odor discharge resembling open flame residue. They'd fine them for a smell. The rumors started fast. Some claimed our HOA president, Brenda, had moved next to the greenbelt and didn't like the wind carrying grease aroma past her meditation deck. Others said her new boyfriend worked for a home insurance firm that wanted to scare people into fire safety policies. Nobody knew the truth, but it didn't really matter. The message was clear. Someone in the board had declared war on BBQs. At first, people tried to resist quietly, grilling after sunset, sneaking electric griddles under covered patios, praying no one would notice. But Brenda noticed everything. She was the kind of person who saw rule violations like heat signatures. And now, she'd turned the entire neighborhood into a war zone of whispers and backyard spies. By the end of June, fear replaced fun. The sound of laughter was gone, replaced by the eerie quiet of compliance. No grills hissed, no smoke rose. It was like watching life drain out of Maple Ridge. But here's the thing about power, it always underestimates hunger. On the evening Brenda announced, complete seasonal review of outdoor cooking activities. My phone buzzed nonstop. Texts from neighbors. Screenshot group chats filled with sarcasm and frustration. So what, we can't even toast marshmallows now? Guess I'll grill in the garage and hope I survive. This is beyond stupid. I stayed quiet at first. I'd always been the neighbor who avoided politics, happy to mow my lawn and mind my own grill. But something snapped in me that night. I stood outside, staring at my cold barbecue covered under its black tarp. The same one I'd owned for 10 years, the one that had smoked brisket for Saturday dinners and seared burgers for birthdays. The silence that used to feel peaceful now felt suffocating, like my backyard had been censored. And that's when the spark hit, the same kind that lights charcoal and ignites rebellion. If Brenda wanted a safe neighborhood with no smoke, I'd give her exactly that. No smoke, no flame, just fireproof, HOA-approved irony. The plan came together faster than I expected. If grilling was banned outdoors, fine, I'd move it indoors. If they said no open flames, I'd use electric ski islets. If they outlawed traditional cookouts, I'd host something even bigger, something perfectly legal, technically compliant, and impossible for them to stop. I'd hold the HOA's first Community Safety Awareness Dinner, and on the menu, everything they'd banned. Not in defiance, but in demonstration. I'd feed them their own hypocrisy, one spice-rubbed lesson at a time. That night, I rolled the barbecue out from under the tarp and wiped the dust off its chrome. Both of us had been patient too long. If they wanted a fight, they'd get a 5-course one. But little did I know, my dinner wouldn't just smoke Brenda out. It would set Maple Ridge on fire, figuratively, of course. The morning after I decided to host my legal barbecue, the plan started to take shape like a slow-cooked brisket, steady, deliberate, and quietly unstoppable. If the HOA wanted to wage war with technicalities, then I'd fight with those same weapons. It wasn't about rebellion for rebellion's sake. It was about proof that their power wasn't law, just intimidation. The ban on grills had been written hastily, full of loopholes that a halfway observant lawyer could drive a food truck through. No outdoor open flames or combustible cooking devices permitted, it said. But nowhere did it mention indoor appliances, steam cookers, or electric grills. And so, with legal precision and a bit of imagination, I declared my kitchen a community service zone. I sent invitations that morning, polite, friendly, and very official looking. Community Safety Awareness Dinner, they read, demonstrating fireless cooking methods for HOA compliance. On paper, it sounded like a presentation. In reality, it was going to be a feast. I copied the HOA's email list from a past neighborhood directory and sent one to every resident, including Brenda and her faithful followers. I even invited the local fire department's public relations officer, the very people the HOA claimed to be protecting us for. That was the beauty of it. Everything perfectly within the lines, every word wrapped in compliance. By the week's end, curiosity spread faster than gossip. Neighbors whispered about it on jogs. Kids mentioned it walking home from school. Even the handful of Brenda's enforcers, who used to pass my house in silence, now paused to glance at my driveway like it was turning into a stage. The HOA tried to ignore me at first. Then, 2 days before the dinner, an email blast went out. It warned residents to avoid unapproved community gatherings and refrain from behavior that may disrupt neighborhood harmony. It even tossed in a veiled threat about potential inspections for unauthorized cooking activity. That's when I knew I had them scared. By Saturday evening, the sun dipped low over Maple Ridge, and the smell of sweet hickory, not charcoal, just wood pellets from my decorative diffuser, floated across the street. My backyard glowed under strands of lights. Tables lined with sides shimmered beneath a canopy labeled, perfectly legally, fire-free culinary demonstration. At 6 o'clock, they started arriving. At first, just a trickle of neighbors, people curious, cautious. Then more. Within 30 minutes, half the block was there. Laughter started creeping back into a neighborhood that had forgotten what it sounded like. The food came next. Grilled ribs and pulled pork, cooked all day with electric rotisseries and slow cookers inside my garage, wafting steam from vents designed for demonstration airflow. Nothing illegal, not a spark of flame, yet every bite tasted like rebellion. Across the street, Brenda appeared, clipboard in hand, expression sharp enough to slice steak. She stood in disbelief as smoke-free perfection greeted her from every plate. I could almost see her brain short-circuiting from the contradiction. Aroma everywhere, but no flames to accuse. Her empire, built on loopholes and fear, was collapsing under the weight of logic and good seasoning. Neighbors who once avoided me now raised plastic cups in silent cheers. Even her loyalists had broken formation, plates piled high, laughing between mouthfuls of non-flammable brisket. And then, the moment that sealed it all, the arrival of the fire department. The crowd quieted as a red truck turned the corner. For a second, Brenda straightened, victorious again, assuming backup had arrived. But instead of sirens and citations, 2 firefighters stepped out, smiling, lured by the smell of my educational exhibit. They walked straight in, grabbed plates, and, after inspecting my setup, gave a polite nod of approval. Safe as it gets, one of them muttered. The crowd erupted in applause. That was the breaking point for Brenda. Her face flushed deep crimson as she stormed off, muttering accusations about manipulation of intent and sabotage of policy. But nobody cared anymore. The illusion of her authority had burned out long before the coals she'd banned. As laughter filled the air, I looked around at the faces lit by warm string lights instead of fear. For the first time in months, Maple Ridge felt like a neighborhood again. Not a bulletin board of fines and fear, but a collection of families sharing food, music, and freedom. By By the time the night ended, the HOA ban had turned into a joke. People were swapping slow cooker recipes that tasted technically illegal, promising to host their own compliance feasts. The rebellion wasn't mine alone anymore. It had spread across every patio and kitchen countertop in the neighborhood. And somewhere beyond the sound of 100 laughter echoes and the clinking of plates, I noticed Brenda's house. Dark, curtains drawn. But there she was, peeking through the blinds, watching everything she tried to suppress come alive again. The quiet, for once, wasn't controlled. It was content. I went to bed that night smelling faintly of barbecue and victory, a satisfying mix of smoke-free triumph and well-earned satisfaction. But the best part wasn't what I'd done. It was knowing that Brenda wasn't through yet, that she'd try to fight back, and that next time she'd make the biggest mistake of all. Brenda had been humiliated before, but this time was different. The fireproof feast hadn't just undermined her authority, it had dismantled it. For weeks, every HOA meeting started with jokes about my electric cookers, and the board's inbox was flooded with sarcastic suggestions for alternative appliances of compliance. Neighbors had their spark back, and Brenda hated that. First, she tried silence. Classic damage control. No new bulletins, no warnings, no fines. It was almost uncomfortable, like calm weather in tornado season. But people like her don't stay quiet long. 3 weeks later, the calm broke. It started with a revised community safety initiative. The HOA posted new signs near the entrance. No outdoor food preparation permitted without board approval. Then came the kicker. Appliances used for mass gatherings must undergo board inspection. The wording was just vague enough to cause confusion, but everyone knew what it meant. It wasn't about safety, it was about sabotage. Brenda had rewritten the rulebook again to target the one thing she couldn't outright forbid, indoor loopholes. And the neighborhood noticed. Her emails became desperate, over-explaining fire safety concerns that no one believed. The more she defended the policy, the more foolish she sounded. People were tired of it. That's when I realized this wasn't just a fight about grilling anymore. It was a fight for control of the neighborhood spirit. So, I decided to take the battle to her own turf the next HOA board meeting. The turnout was larger than usual. Normally, these monthly sessions drew maybe a dozen homeowners. That evening, the community center overflowed. The smell of coffee and quiet defiance filled the room. Brenda sat at the head of the table, posture stiff, makeup perfect, the illusion of control barely holding. The meeting started like always, itemized lists, scripted formalities, endless rules read aloud. But the moment she reached item 8, discussion of feeding-related activities, the tension cracked open. Residents began speaking up, politely at first, then louder. They talked about community, about family, about how a piece of grilled chicken brought more unity than 2 years of HOA emails ever had. One even mentioned the absurdity of approving every kitchen gadget like a security threat. Brenda tried to cut them off, citing procedural rules, but they kept going, one voice after another backing the same message. Enough. It was the first time I saw her falter. Her hand gripped the table, her eyes darting for support from board members who were no longer nodding. Some wouldn't even look her way. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I stood and calmly laid out the truth. Every code section she'd twisted, every rule she'd rewritten, every contradiction between her safety policies and the county's actual fire ordinances. I projected my research on the community screen, indisputable proof that the HOA had no authority to enforce what she'd banned. You could feel the shift in the room, quiet pride replacing fear. Brenda sat frozen, forced to watch her words turned against her. But the real knockout didn't come from me, came from within. The HOA's vice president, an older man who'd once supported her, suddenly spoke up. He proposed a motion, a formal vote to suspend the grilling restrictions pending review. The room went silent. Then, one by one, hands rose. Every board member, every attending resident, even Brenda's closest allies. Unanimous. Just like that, the no-grill policy was dead. She tried to object, a final burst of authority, but the vice president cut her off firmly. announcing that the board's time under current leadership had run its course. He proposed a secondary motion to elect interim officers until new formal elections could take place in the fall. The applause was immediate. It wasn't loud. It wasn't mocking. It was relief, the sound of a neighborhood reclaiming itself. The next morning, Brenda's front yard sign, the one that once read "Proud HOA President, keeping our neighborhood safe," was gone. Just a patch of bare grass where control used to grow. As the days passed, there was a lightness in Maple Ridge again. BBQs flared up that weekend. Small gatherings at first, then louder ones with the smell of meat and laughter filling the air. My own grill stood proudly back on the patio, flame blazing under the sunset like a victory torch. I thought we'd finally reached peace. But like every story with a villain who can't quit, Brenda wasn't finished. Because a week later, a letter showed up in every mailbox. Not from the HOA, but from her personally. Typed, folded neatly, stamped with precision. It wasn't a threat. It was an invitation. Community potluck dinner hosted by Brenda. Saturday, 6 p.m. menu. Grilled chicken and ribs. My jaw literally dropped. After all that, after her crusade against smoke, flames, and disruptive aromas, she was hosting her own barbecue. It didn't make sense. Unless, of course, it wasn't about reconciliation at all. No, this was ego. The HOA had fallen, and she wasn't trying to rebuild it. She was trying to rewrite the story. And she had no idea that her grand comeback party was about to go up in smoke. The irony came pre-seasoned. After months of crusading against grills, flames, and aromas inconsistent with neighborhood standards, Brenda, the architect of Maple Ridge's brief anti-barbecue dictatorship, suddenly invited everyone to her backyard for a massive community cookout in the spirit of unity. You couldn't make this up. It was equal parts delusion and desperation. The invitations were immaculate, printed on glossy cardstock featuring little illustrations of happy families at the grill. And that tagline across the bottom, bold and cheerful. Sometimes change begins by sharing a meal. Everyone knew what this really was. Comeback tour. PR stunt. The woman who'd turned our summers into corporate memos was now trying to rebrand herself as the heart of the neighborhood. The reaction across Maple Ridge was complicated. Some neighbors rolled their eyes. Others joked about checking for hidden speakers. And a few, perhaps out of curiosity, or maybe a sense of morbid entertainment, admitted they'd attend just to see what would happen. I wasn't planning to go at first. I'd had my victory, my peace. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how poetic it would be to show up, to stand quietly among the crowd and watch her exhaust herself trying to control a fire she couldn't manage. So that Saturday, as the evening sun turned the pavement gold, I walked down the street to Brenda's backyard. And I have to admit, it was impressive. String lights hung everywhere, tables brimmed with salads and sauces, and at the center stood a brand new professional gas grill, gleaming, spotless, and definitely bought days before. The smell of propane and marinated chicken lingered faintly in the air. She'd spent a small fortune recreating the exact thing she'd tried to erase. The crowd she once alienated now moved awkwardly through her lawn, uncertain whether this was hospitality or confession. Brenda herself was radiant in forced cheerfulness. She floated from group to group, reciting pleasantries with the tone of someone auditioning for forgiveness. Every glance she cast, though, landed near me, like she was measuring my reaction, waiting for a sign that she'd flipped the story back in her favor. But I wasn't her problem. The problem was under her control panel, because the brand new grill, as expensive as it looked, hadn't been assembled by professionals. And the evening breeze that made her fairy lights sway so beautifully was also feeding the faintest of leaks beneath her stainless steel appliance. By the time she finally reached for the ignition switch, the crowd was watching, not out of sympathy but curiosity. One twist of the knob, one spark, a sudden pop, followed by a bloom of flame so fast and hot that it startled everyone within 10 feet. It didn't explode. It just whooshed upward, a flare of orange licking at her perfectly curated bunting and singeing the welcome to the cookout banner hanging above. People gasped. Someone yelled. Brenda stumbled backward, dropping her tongs into the grass as the immediate chaos unfolded. It was comical more than dangerous. A neighbor quickly pulled the propane line free, while another smothered the small burst with a towel. In less than a minute, the flame died out, but the humiliation would last forever. Some of the string lights melted slightly, a perfect metaphor for her efforts to rewrite her image. The grill, blackened along one side, hissed weakly as she stood beside it, face pale, pride charred. And then, as if fate had decided irony deserved an encore, one of the fire department trucks that had attended my fire-free feast weeks earlier rolled by on patrol. Seeing the commotion, the same firefighter stepped out, the one who'd eaten 3 helpings of my brisket. He took one look at her grill, let out a quiet whistle, and muttered under his breath something about proper inspection procedures. The crowd chuckled. Brenda forced a smile, but it was trembling. Her event wasn't a barbecue anymore. It was a blooper reel. Neighbors stayed polite, of course. Maple Ridge prided itself on appearances. People offered kind words, plate refills, even jokes about well-done chicken. But the tone had shifted. The authority she'd once wielded had evaporated completely, replaced by the uneasy warmth of pity. When I finally left, she tried to catch my eye, maybe to read whether I was laughing at her or forgiving her. I gave her nothing, because the truth was simple. She wasn't the villain anymore. She was the cautionary tale. That night, as lights dimmed and leftovers cooled, word spread faster than smoke. Within hours, photos of her scorched banner and semi-charred grill circulated through private neighborhood chats. Not cruelly, just inevitably. Nobody said karma out loud. They didn't need to. The next morning, the HOA's official site quietly added a new post, Open Flame Guidelines, a reminder to check manufacturer safety labels. No mention of the cookout. No mention of Brenda. Just a sterile note dangling in the void where her authority once lived. She stopped showing up at board meetings after that. Stopped walking the neighborhood. Stopped hovering over everyone's yards like a hawk waiting to ticket a lawn chair. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even victory. It was resolution. A community that had learned, through irony, laughter, and a little heat, that rules don't build unity. People do. And while Brenda's broken grill sat cooling in the curbside trash the next day, the scent of genuine barbecue returned to Maple Ridge, thick, smoky, and sweeter than ever before. Because this time it didn't smell like rebellion. It smelled like freedom. Summer faded slowly in Maple Ridge, carrying with it the lingering scent of something different in the air. Not just charcoal or grilled ribs, but change, full-bodied, unmistakable change. For the first time in years, the neighborhood didn't feel like a stage managed by one person's clipboard. Felt real. Felt free. Brenda's downfall didn't erupt in grand flames or public humiliation beyond her own doing. It simmered quietly, fading the same way control always does when people stop giving it oxygen. After the infamous comeback cookout, she went quiet. Her once proud HOA presidency plaque disappeared from her front porch. Her manicured hydrangeas wilted without their weekly tending. The woman who once walked the streets in power now walked them in silence. Still polite, still put together, but invisible. And yet, somehow, the neighborhood thrived because of it. The new, temporary HOA leadership made a promise early on fewer restrictions, more trust. The next newsletter, which used to read like legal code dressed up in pastel fonts, simply said, "Enjoy the season. Be kind. Be careful. No bullet points. No block capitals. Just an understanding that people could coexist without needing someone to micromanage their weekends." Barbecues returned almost instantly. The first one started small. A single grill, a few neighbors, laughter soft but genuine. The second one, the week after, grew bigger. By mid-July, Saturday evenings had turned into one long, winding celebration of smoke and stories. Food passed between fences, kids zipped on scooters between yards, and the air smelled once again like independence. Like ribs sizzling in unison, like the faint hum of normalcy. It wasn't perfect. It was better. Every so often, when I'd light my grill, I'd catch sight of Brenda's curtains twitching across the street. She never came out, never complained. Sometimes she stood there just long enough to see the laughter spilling across the lawns, and then she'd vanish again into that immaculate house she'd once ruled like a fortress. Part of me thought she'd learned something. Part of me knew she probably hadn't. But that's the thing about transformation. Sometimes it's not for everyone. Sometimes, peace means accepting that you can't change everyone's recipe. You just keep cooking yours anyway. By late August, the board held an open meeting to make the repeal of the grill ban official. The turnout was huge. People brought food, of course, a potluck celebration more than a business session. Even the vice president of the fire department came, eating brisket and half-joking that Maple Ridge had single-handedly revived the art of safe grilling. The motion passed with unanimous votes. No dissent, no speech, just applause. I remember sitting at my table in the back, plate piled high, thinking how simple it all really was. The HOA had built walls of fear for years. All it took to tear them down was a barbecue and a little backbone. After the meeting, a neighbor came up and asked whether I ever regretted starting the whole thing. All the tension, the risk, the showdowns. I told him the truth. I didn't regret a second, because every story worth retelling starts with someone refusing to stay quiet. And this story, this one had seasoning. In the weeks that followed, even Brenda's house changed. One afternoon, I passed by and noticed something new. A faint wisp of gray smoke curling from her balcony. Not thick or proud, but real. A small electric grill humming gently beside a set of tongs. A peace offering to herself, perhaps, or maybe a quiet acceptance that she'd been on the wrong side of things all along. I didn't wave. She didn't look over. But that was fine. It was enough to smell the faint trail of something familiar. The smell of a community finally warming again. By September, Maple Ridge had returned to something it hadn't been in years. Not polished, not perfect, not rule-bound. Just human. String lights sagged in uneven lines across fences. Someone left a vintage smoker in the communal park for others to use. The kids spray-painted HOA Free Zone on a patch of cardboard and taped it to the notice board. No one complained. Not even the board. Especially not the board. That final weekend of summer, I hosted one last barbecue of the season. Smaller this time. No audience, no politics, just food, friends, and laughter. When the sun dipped low, shadows rolling across the yards like spilled ink, I realized how far the neighborhood had come. Control had turned to connection. Rules had turned to respect. All because one stubborn man decided that sometimes standing up for something as simple as smoke is really standing up for something much bigger. The right to breathe freely in your own backyard. People think defiance always looks loud, messy, destructive. It doesn't. Sometimes it looks like a clean grill, waiting quietly for its next meal. Sometimes it smells like brisket just before the first slice. And sometimes it sounds like laughter echoing through a block that's finally free to live again.